Welcome to Thriller 3D. Join me on a journey into the heart of darkness as we explore spine-tingling horror stories, haunted places, and unearth the chilling unknown. Buckle up, turn down the lights, and prepare for a terrifying adventure you won't soon forget. I was never one to believe in the supernatural. Ghost stories and urban legends were just campfire tales to me, something to laugh at with friends over a few beers. That all changed one fateful summer when I and my group of friends decided to go camping deep in the remote forests of northern Arizona. What started as a fun getaway turned into a nightmare beyond our wildest imaginations. Our group consisted of 5 close friends: Mark, the rugged outdoorsman and de facto leader of our little expedition; Sarah, his girlfriend and an adventurous spirit; Jake, the funny guy who always lightened the mood; Emily, the quiet but smart girl who had a fascination with the unknown; and me, Alex, the skeptic who believed in logic and reason above all else. We had been planning this trip for months, and the anticipation was electric as we arrived at the trailhead. The forest was thick, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the tall pine trees. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but I brushed it off as paranoia. For the first few days, everything was perfect. We hiked during the day, set up camp by night, and told stories around the campfire. It was like something out of a postcard. But as the days passed, the atmosphere began to change. One evening, as we sat around the campfire, Emily brought up the legend of the Skinwalkers. She spoke in hushed tones, her eyes darting nervously to the darkness beyond the firelight. According to Navajo legend, Skinwalkers were witches who could transform into animals, taking on their characteristics and abilities. I scoffed at the idea, chalking it up to local superstition. But the unease in the air was palpable, and even I couldn't deny the unsettling feeling that had settled over our camp. That night, we heard strange noises in the woods. At first, we brushed it off as forest creatures, but these sounds were different, unnatural. Sarah said she saw something moving at the edge of the campfire's glow, something that resembled a distorted figure. Mark grabbed his flashlight and bravely ventured into the darkness, while the rest of us huddled around the fire, our hearts pounding. Minutes passed, and Mark returned, his face drained of color. He whispered, "I saw something out there, something that wasn't right. We need to pack up and leave." But the forest was pitch black, and packing up in haste was no easy task. As we scrambled to gather our belongings, we heard eerie whispers carried by the wind. It was a language we couldn't understand, filled with malice and dread. Suddenly, Jake screamed, and we turned to see him being dragged into the shadows. We rushed to him, but it was too late. All that remained were his torn clothes scattered on the forest floor. Panic surged through our veins as we fled deeper into the woods. We stumbled upon a small cave, and with no other options, we sought refuge inside. The night dragged on, and the whispers continued to haunt us. Emily clutched her backpack, revealing a book she had brought with her, a journal of local legends and folklore. She began to read about the Navajo Skinwalkers, their dark rituals, and their insatiable hunger for human flesh. Hours passed, and exhaustion finally overcame our fear. We fell asleep in the cold, damp cave, with our backs pressed against the unforgiving stone. Morning light filtered through the trees, but there was no sense of relief. Mark, Emily, Sarah, and I were the only ones left. Jake was gone, and the terror of the previous night hung over us like a shroud. We decided to make our way back to civilization, but the forest had become an alien, hostile place. The trees seemed to twist and contort, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy with an unnatural silence. As we walked, we heard footsteps echoing our own, but there was no one in sight. Panic set in once more as we realized that something was following us, matching our pace with eerie precision. Sarah's gaze darted around, her eyes filled with dread. "It's a skinwalker." "I know it is," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mark, who had always been the voice of reason, said, "We can't outrun it. We need to find a way to stop it." Emily, ever the researcher, remembered a passage in the journal about how to ward off skinwalkers. It spoke of a ritual using salt and sage. We scoured our backpacks for any supplies we could use, and after what felt like an eternity, we found a small container of salt and some matches. We set up a protective circle of salt around us and lit sage to create a barrier of smoke. For hours, we huddled within that circle, praying for daylight to chase away the creature that pursued us. The footsteps outside the circle continued, but the creature couldn't cross our makeshift barrier. The sun finally rose, and with it, the footsteps ceased. It was as if the skinwalker had retreated with the darkness. We knew we had to leave immediately. With trembling hands, we gathered our belongings and left the cave. The forest was still hostile, but it seemed to relent in the daylight. We made our way back to the trailhead, never looking back. We reported Jake's disappearance to the authorities, but they could find no trace of him. They told us it was likely a wild animal attack, but we knew the truth. We knew that the skinwalker had taken him, and it had been hunting us. We left the forest that day, forever changed by the horrors we had witnessed. I had been a skeptic, but I now knew that some things defy explanation. The legend of the skinwalker had become all too real for us, and we carried the scars, both physical and emotional, with us for the rest of our lives. I learned that there are forces in this world that are beyond our comprehension, that the line between reality and myth is thinner than we'd ever imagined. And as I sit here, writing this account of our harrowing ordeal, I can't help but wonder if the skinwalker still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its next victim to wander into its domain. It was a crisp autumn evening when my friends and I decided to venture into the heart of the Appalachian Mountains for a weekend of camping and exploration. Our group consisted of 4 close friends: Mike, the adventurous spirit always seeking a thrill; Lisa, the pragmatic and level-headed one; Sarah, the witty and outgoing friend; and myself, John, the skeptic who never believed in anything beyond the realm of science. The trip began as a light-hearted adventure. We hiked through dense woods, set up camp by a tranquil river, and gathered around a crackling fire. We laughed and joked under the starry sky, believing this to be the perfect getaway. Little did we know, our idyllic excursion was about to take a dark and terrifying turn. On the second night of our camping trip, the atmosphere began to shift. An eerie stillness settled over the forest, and the once cheerful campfires seemed feeble against the encroaching darkness. The rustling leaves and chirping crickets had ceased, and an overwhelming sense of dread hung in the air. Lisa spoke up, her voice shaking. "Do you guys hear that? It sounds like whispers in the wind." We strained our ears, and to our horror, we did hear something. It was a faint, incomprehensible murmur, carried by the breeze. Sarah suggested it might be a nearby stream or a trick of the wind, but deep down, we all knew it was something else, something unnatural. That night, I was jolted awake by a strange noise outside our tents. It was a guttural growl, low and menacing. I unzipped my tent quietly and peered out, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the moonlight, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It stood on two legs, covered in matted fur, and its eyes gleamed with malevolence. It was a grotesque fusion of a wolf and a human, a creature from the darkest corners of folklore, a werewolf. I rushed back to the tents, waking my friends in a panic. "There's something out there," I whispered urgently. "Something terrible." Mike scoffed at me, thinking it was just a bear or a trick of the imagination. But Lisa and Sarah exchanged worried glances, sensing the genuine fear in my voice. The whispers in the wind grew louder, more coherent, and chilling. They seemed to be calling our names, urging us to come closer. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, taunting us with its sinister secrets. With trembling hands, we huddled together by the fire, clutching makeshift weapons, a branch here, a pocket knife there. We watched in terror as the creature circled our camp, its eyes never leaving us. Then, the worst happened. Mike, in an act of bravado, decided to confront the creature. He stepped out of the protective ring of firelight and into the darkness. We pleaded with him to come back, but he was consumed by a determination we couldn't comprehend. He walked further into the woods, and the whispers intensified. We saw a shadowy figure emerge from the trees, and then silence. Mike was gone. Panicked and paralyzed with fear, we dared not venture out to look for him. We stayed huddled by the fire, praying for dawn to break and the nightmare to end. As the first light of day pierced the sky, we cautiously ventured out. The werewolf was nowhere to be seen, but there was no sign of Mike either. All that remained were his footprints leading into the woods, the last traces of our friend. Tears welled up in our eyes as we realized that we had to leave the cursed forest behind. We packed up our camp in haste and made our way back to civilization, haunted by the memory of that fateful night. We reported Mike's disappearance to the authorities, but they, like me before that night, dismissed our claims as wild imagination and suggested he had become lost or injured in the wilderness. But we knew the truth. We had encountered a creature of myth and terror, something that should not exist. Mike had paid the price for our disbelief, and it was a lesson we would carry with us for the rest of our lives. As I recount this harrowing experience, I can't help but wonder if the whispers in the wind still haunt those dark woods, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting campers to venture into their domain. The line between reality and legend had blurred for us that night, and I can only hope that others take our warning seriously before it's too late. I never intended to stumble upon the eerie legend of the Skinwalker. It was a chilling accident that forever changed my perspective on the world. My name is Daniel, and I was a curious wanderer who had a penchant for seeking out remote and mysterious places. Little did I know that my desire for adventure would lead me into the heart of a nightmare. It all began one gloomy evening when I decided to explore a remote corner of the Arizona desert. The sky was overcast, and the wind howled through the rugged landscape. I was drawn to the area by vague whispers of strange happenings, and the shadowy figures that locals dared not speak of openly. As I ventured deeper into the desert, the air grew thick with unease. The wind carried eerie, incomprehensible murmurs, and the rustling of the desert plants sounded like sinister laughter. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. That evening, I set up a makeshift camp, hoping to document the unique flora and fauna of the region. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the desert took on a haunting aura. The once familiar landscape transformed into a labyrinth of shifting shadows and ominous shapes. Sitting by my flickering campfire, I was consumed by a growing sense of dread. The whispers in the wind became more coherent, forming syllables and words that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the malicious intent was unmistakable. Then I saw it, a figure emerging from the darkness, just beyond the reach of the firelight. It was hunched and distorted, moving with a twisted, unnatural gait. My heart raced as I watched in horror. It was a creature, a grotesque fusion of man and beast, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my very soul. It was a skinwalker. I stumbled backward in terror, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The creature advanced slowly, its movements deliberate and calculated. It was as if it fed on my fear, savoring every moment of my terror. Panicked and desperate, I reached into my backpack, fumbling for anything that could help me. My trembling hands found a small container of salt, a last-ditch effort based on the folklore I had heard. I tossed the salt at the creature, but it merely laughed, a chilling, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. In a final, desperate act, I threw the container of salt into the campfire. Flames and sparks erupted, casting an eerie glow that seemed to sear the creature's flesh. It let out a blood-curdling scream and retreated into the darkness, vanishing like a phantom. I spent the rest of the night huddled by the dying embers of my campfire, praying for morning to come. When the first light of day broke, I wasted no time in packing up my camp and fleeing the desert. I reported the encounter to the authorities, but they dismissed it as a delusion brought on by the desolation of the desert. They couldn't explain what I had seen, but they refused to accept the supernatural as an explanation. As I left the desert behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the skinwalker was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another accidental encounter. My skepticism had been shattered, replaced by a haunting uncertainty. The line between reality and legend had blurred for me, and I knew that some mysteries were best left undiscovered.